For the segment today, I'd like to start with talking about, as a bass player, how to start learning a tune. And it's more geared toward the improvisational aspect. So if you're reading a big band chart and all the notes are written, and then you get to that section where there's just chord symbols and no notes written, you may be wondering, what do I do now? And these are going to be the steps to help you do that. Also, if you're playing in a small group ensemble, you'll often get a chart of a tune with maybe the melody and the chords written, where you're gonna have to do the same thing as improvise a walking bass line. Chosen the tune, the A section to a tune called New Orleans by Hoagy Carmichael. And I chose this because it sort of has 4 of the main chord types all in the A section that are, if you can figure out how to play the chord tones for these 4 chord types, you're going to be 90% of the way there. I tend to think of chords in 3 chord families: major, dominant, and minor. Major chord just being root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. The dominant chord being a root, 3rd, 5th, and flat 7th. Minor chord, root, flat 3rd, 5th, flat 7, and a minor 7, flat 5 chord, which is root, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. What we're going to learn to do today is play all of these chord tones for the A section of the tune New Orleans. The first chord of the tune is a G minor 7. So what we're going to do, we're going to play all the chord tones that we can here in half position, all the way up to B flat, and then when we descend, we're going to play all the chord tones underneath the root that we started. So we're learning all the chord tones that are available to us in this one position. So 4th finger on G, 1st finger on B flat, open D, 4th finger on F, open G, 4th finger on B flat, back down the same way, G, F, D, B flat, back to our root G, then underneath we're going to grab the flat 7, F, and then back to the root. So the whole arpeggio will sound like this. So what's a little bit different about this, and the way you may have already learned an arpeggio, is usually when we learn arpeggios out of books, we're usually going root, up to the root, and then back down to the root again. What we're missing in that approach is these other chord tones that are available to us right in this position. So if we just learn them, making use of all the chord tones in that position and not just a pattern that we learn. So the next chord of the tune is A dominant 7. We're going to play A open, C sharp with our 4th finger, then we don't have to shift at all, to E with our 1st finger, open G, 1 on A, back down the same way. Back to the root. So underneath the root, we went down to the flat 7, and then we were also able to grab the 5th, and then back up to the root. So the whole arpeggio sounds like this. The next chord of the tune is a D7. When you see a chord symbol and it just has a 7 by it, that's implying that that chord is a dominant 7 chord. So D7, we have open D, 4th finger F sharp, 1st finger A, Then we're going to pivot up to the C with our fourth finger. And then back down. Back to the root, flat 7, C, 5th, A, 3rd, back to the 5th, flat 7, ending on the root. So the whole arpeggio will sound like this. The next chord is a G dominant 7. So for this chord, we're going to start with our fourth finger on G, B with our second finger, open D, shifting up to 2 on the F, open G, and then fourth finger on B, open, fourth finger on F, open, B. And the reason I shifted to my second finger on that F was so that I didn't have to shift to grab that B. So coming from the open D, it was. So the whole arpeggio sounds like this. The next chord is a C minor 7 chord. Root, flat 3rd, 5, and flat 7. So we have C, E flat, G, and B, or all our B flat are all our chord tones. So going up, fourth finger on C, first finger on E flat, G open. Then we're going to shift to first finger on B flat, fourth finger on C, back down the same way. Back to the root, then we have our flat 7 and 5 that we can grab underneath the root. So the whole arpeggio sounds like this. Next chord, F dominant 7. We're going to start with our first finger on the root, open, A, fourth finger on C, first finger on E flat. Then we're going to shift second finger to F, first finger to A, pivoting up to C, back down A, and here I'm going to shift to 4 on F, so then I don't have to shift again for the remainder of the arpeggio. So it sounds like this. So 2 more chords, we're almost there. B flat major. First finger on B flat, open D, fourth finger F, second finger A, B flat, fourth finger, back down the same way. And then underneath the root, we can grab the major 7, open A, and the 5th, back up to the root. So it sounds like this. And lastly, A minor 7 flat 5. For this chord, just like minor, except we flat the 5. So we have A, C, our flatted 5th, which is the E flat, G, first finger on A, pivoting up to C, back down to A, open, and grabbing the flat 7 underneath the A, back to the root. So the whole arpeggio sounds like this. So for every chord in that A section of the tune,
You need to be able to know what the chord tones are and be able to play them. And let me talk about if that's old to you and you've already done that, add the second octave to all of those and venture into this register of the bass. Now, mind you, we're getting, as bass players, we want the majority of our notes, if we're being supportive, to be in this range down here. Doesn't mean we can't go up, but we're for a little bit, but then we're back down here, and people in the band want to hear this low end. We will move on to the next PDF, which is just creating a chord tone bass line with no chromaticism at all. So all I'm going to do is outline each chord of this A section of the tune just by using chord tones, and 4 notes per measure. And let me take a second to talk about just how I'm plucking the strings here. Many of you may be coming from other backgrounds. Maybe you're an electric bass player who's learning acoustic. Maybe you're a cellist in the orchestra who's been asked to play the bass in the jazz band. So pizzicato differs really from both of those instruments. It's more similar to electric bass in that I'm going to use, if I'm playing a quarter note bass line, I'm generally, unless the tempo is very fast, I'm going to use one finger to have an even, sustained 4 note per measure walking line. Like, what we don't want short notes. We want the notes to be long and connected to one another. How you should pluck the note is called a rest stroke. And what's happening here is we're not plucking out away from the bass like a classical pizz. We're plucking down toward the fingerboard, and my finger is actually landing on the string behind it. It's called a rest stroke. So I'm going to get a bigger sound this way than if I tried to play it like this or tried to. So we want to be a bass player with a big sound. So what I would do is practice with each finger. Just practice with the index finger, playing open strings. Practice with your middle finger. Often when I'm playing totally acoustic, I might even use both fingers. And then you can also practice alternating. For more melodic passages and solos, I often use alternating fingers. So getting back to the PDF, we're going to do a chord tone bass line for the A section of New Orleans. So the first chord is G minor. I'll play 2 bars at the same time, 2 bars, and then I'll stop so you can see how I'm connecting the notes. I'm going up G minor, and then I'm just going down A7. So I've just outlined those chords. Next 2 bars, I'm going down the chord tones of D7. Up the chord tones of G. So there on the G7, I went back to the 3rd so that I could get to the root of the next chord, which is C. So let me play those first 4 bars. So that's a line with no chromaticism whatsoever. The next 4 bars, we have C minor 7, straight up a C minor,
arpeggio, and down. So I ended on that B flat. Rather than skip to the root, I just played the third first on the F7 and went down an F7 chord. So I went, next chord is B flat major. And then we have just 2 beats apiece, A minor 7 flat 5, and then D7. So those 8 bars sound like this. Measure 9, I've written 8 more bars that you can look at. So a great place to start is just learning your chord tones and arpeggios and trying to outline your chords as in true fashion as you can. So the next PDF that I'm going to refer to is called Chord Tones plus Approach Note on 4. And that means an approach note on beat 4. And what all an approach note is a half step to a chord tone, and it can be either. So if our chord tone that we're aiming at is B flat, we can approach that note by either A or B. So we could go or. So what we're going to do, we're going to outline a G minor 7, and then on the 4th beat we're going to be a half step away from the chord tone we're aiming at, which is the next chord of A7. So we're going to root, flat 3, 5, and then approach note to A. We outline A and then approach note to D. Now we're headed to G, so just an approach note to G. Note to C. So those first 4 bars will sound like this. And we follow that same formula through. And what I would advise you to do with this is actually write your own lines out. How I learned to improvise bass lines was I knew enough information, but I could not yet improvise it in real time. But I knew enough, I knew my chord tones, I knew generally what a bass line should sound like, so I just used that information. I'd hit the paper, and then I'd memorize my chorus, and then I'd go into jazz combo and play the same bass line over and over. And then each week I would try to write another one and memorize another one, so I wasn't playing the same one over and over. And I found that the more I did this and memorized and went through this writing process, that within a pretty short time, I'd say like 6 months or so, I felt like I was then able just to improvise these lines pretty well without having to write and memorize. But I think it's a good stepping stone to get to that point. So I have all my students write out lines. So getting back to the PDF, we're on C minor, going to F7 in measure 5. So we have root, flat 3rd, 5th, passing tone to the F, and then down F, flat 7, 5, approach note to the B flat, root 3rd, 5th, approach note to the A, and then we're just outlining chords on that bar. And then down the same way, G minor, A7, approach note to G, approach note to C, and that approach note happens to also just be a chord tone on G. We have the B there, and it also works as an approach note to C. So then down C minor, so let me play through slowly the whole 16 bars here. First two A sections. So the next exercise that we're going to do, the last PDF, is we're going to use the same approach that we did by putting a passing tone on beat 4, but this time we're going to put it on beat 2. And I teach sort of the next level of bass lines I teach is what's called strong beat, weak beat, where the strong beat is your 1 and 3, and the weak beats are your 2 and 4. So we want chord tones on beats 1 and 3, and then really any other note, passing tone or a scale tone or another chord tone on beats 2 and 4. But our main thing is we're trying to line those chord tones up on beats 1 and 3. And in sort of teaching this, I kind of review the way I actually play. Now, all these are sort of exercises that we do to sort of learn to play and learn to be in the moment. And when I'm playing, I'm actually sort of juggling all these things around. I'm not just drawing from one of these approaches, or it's kind of all mixed together. But if we can sort of practice them in more of a detailed fashion, I find that they'll actually have more potential to come out in your playing naturally. We're just doing the same thing on this next PDF, except we're putting a passing tone on beat 2, or an approach note on beat 2. So starting with the G minor, G, and then we have B flat, which is a chord tone on beat 3, but I'm just going to approach that with an A. And then we have a 5th on the 4th beat. So that A ends up being a scale tone anyway, so it fits real nicely in the harmony. But it's sort of working as an approach note to beat 3. Since we ended on a D, instead of drop back down to the A, I'm going to grab the 3rd on beat 1. Now I do this sometimes, not often. Most of the time I am aiming at hitting those roots on beat 1, but for nice voice leading and more of a linear approach, we can sometimes add those 3rds on beat 1, as long as we're outlining the chord. So we're coming from that D, and we have C sharp on beat 1, which is the 3rd of A. Then we're going to play an approach note down to the root, which is A, so B flat, and then back to the C sharp. So we're going. takes us to the D7. Now the D7, we're going to play the root on beat 1. Then we have the F, which is the flat third, an approach note to the 3rd. And then the 5th. So we have, and then the same for the G7. We have the root on beat 1. And then this is a sort of a tricky little move, but I've grown to like it. When you play the root on beat 1, and then we just have a half step down to the dominant 7. So you get a chromatic. So those whole first 4 bars sound like this. And that leads us to the root of the C minor. So coming down the G7, we had G flat, which is a passing tone to that flat 7. So from the C minor, we just follow that same approach. There's always going to be a passing tone on beat 2. F7, passing tone to the 7, flat 7 again. D flat, passing tone to the 3rd. So those first 8 bars will sound like this. Following that same idea, measure 9, we just have another A section. I'll go ahead and play it for you. So those are 2 ways to start adding some chromaticism to your chord tone lines. Just adding an approach note on beat 4 or an approach note on beat 2. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope it gives you something to practice on and improve your walking lines. So if you have any questions about any of the information that we talked about today, or just bass in general, or the program here at UM, feel free to email me and I will get back to you. Thank you.